Hi, soulmates. Welcome back. It's episode 7, which we're calling Uncurdled, the Dairy Diaries. And I'm joined once again by superstar producer Claire Mackenzie. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Richard. I think I'm going to laugh at that title every time you say it.
It's true. It's true.
How are you? Because you're now back.
I'm
in the
back
States,
in Austin, Texas. So what's been going on in your world, Claire?
So it's been a busy summer. It started very busy with work, and then it moved more into touching base with the family. It is feeling quite autumnal here in Britain. It's been a hot, dry summer. Been talking to lots of farmers here. Some of them, I think, have really suffered with the harvest, particularly the veg people. A lot of water has been needed, but I think the cash crops aren't looking too bad, wheat, etc. So that is good news. But it has been really wonderful. And I'm really excited because having done groundswell, I'm off to a smaller version of that on Thursday in Jersey. So I'll be able to report on that next time we speak. And that's going to be really fascinating. But yes, there's lots going on in the 6 inches of soil, behind the scenes. The film's still doing its business. Unilever are doing a screening, so that will be interesting. I actually, on Monday, the other exciting things, I am sitting on a round table discussion in Parliament with Ros Savage, the MP, and various others, and it's about soil literacy. And one of the people is Karen Johnson. In fact, she's leading on it, who's been on our pod. So it'll be really exciting to put that, and I will try and interview her and ask her bits after that so we can come back. So that'll be really fascinating for you.
That'd be great. Love Karen. And room 15, I've heard, is the best room as well. So today we're talking about dairy. We're going to split it into 2 episodes. This is the first of 2. We've got British guests on this one, which you were kind enough to know and persuade them to do it. So who do we have, Claire?
Yeah, dairy is obviously a really big subject. So we will come back to this. We did try and get in line with someone or 1 or 2 people from the States, but the timing and everything. So we've gone for as we've done before, we've gone for a split. So we've got part 1 and part 2. This is part 1. And we have James Robinson, who we've done a lot with. First of all, we filmed with him during our 6 inches of soil journey. We did not put dairy into it because it was one of those subjects that was too far and a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But we do have wonderful clips of him and Ben, and we have been looking at editing those, and someone's trying to help us do that. And hopefully more and more of those will go out on the YouTube, and we'll share those. So we've got to know James quite well, but James is also leading light in Nature Friendly Farming Network, who's been a partner of ours for the film, the book, this project. So his deep knowledge of the importance of soil and nature is incredible. And he's also wonderful to listen to. And that's really important on a podcast. And he's also the kindest man. So he's given us time again. And I've been back to his farm to do hedge laying, and that was incredible. And so I've been very, very fortunate to spend a bit of time there up in Cumbria, and recommend anyone, if you ever can, to go on one of his farm walks, etc., and meet his family.
And you were kind enough to introduce me to him at Groundswell, and the first thing I saw was his massive sideburns coming from 100 meters away, and such a friendly man, beautiful smile. And he farms in a part of the UK up in the Lake District, which is actually part of my heritage. A lot of the Tufton family come from up in Appleby in Westmoreland, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. Lake District, hills, lakes, lots of rainfall, green grass, and glorious accent as well, which I hope you'll enjoy on this episode. And who's the other guest, Claire?
The other guest is someone we've got to know as well. I don't personally know him as well, but Mel Bradley, who's done a lot of our coordination and led on our distribution, has spent quite a lot of time with Tim, getting him to talks and events she organises. He's been really giving to us. So Tim Mead, his family, the founders and owners of Yo Valley. It's an organic yogurt primarily brand. They have many other businesses as well, but the Yo Valley is the brand that we know in the UK and is in every single supermarket. They recently, they've always been organic, they've been particularly prominent in talking about soil and regenerative and side of farming and testing their farms, etc. And we did a screening there quite early on. They were really generous and paid for us to be there as a corporate screening. and brought their staff in, and we had an amazing time. Their headquarters, if anyone's ever visiting the UK or anyone from the UK gets a chance, go to the O Valley headquarters down in Somerset in the Chew Valley, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it sits on the top, and you can learn loads about dairy and also enjoy yourself, lovely food while you're there. So yeah, he's been fantastic, and his insights are really incredible on the whole system.
Yeah, it's a real coup to get him. Yo Valley are a huge brand. To have a brand like that behind a movement like this movement is really special. And Tim was very generous with his time, well, as was James as well. So without further ado, here is the episode. So welcome, soil mates, to another episode of 6 Inches of Soil, the podcast. This episode we're calling Uncurdled, the Dairy Diaries. Try saying that in a hurry, bit tricky. It's time for another episode where we're going to squeeze some extra life out of the topic. Okay, that's enough of the terrible puns. So we've got some amazing guests on with us today. So first of all, James Robinson, do you want to explain to the listeners who you are in the world of milk and dairy and where you kind of fit into the supply chain? And then we'll come on to Timothy Mead from Yo Valley.
So who I am, I'm just another farmer, I suppose. We are family farm up at Strickley in South Cumbria, quite a lot further north of Mr. Mead, but we are, it's an interesting land farm where we are. It's rolling hills, all grassland, heaps of rain, as Cumbria tends to get, and we are native bred dairy shorthorns as well. So we've been pedigreed for about 110, 120 years. We've actually been on the farm for 150 years this year. So it's sort of a momentous year for our family here. And I'm the 5th generation of Robinsons to farm here. My dad's still working full time. And then son Robert as well, who's also on the farm full time as well. So we've got 3 generations. Definitely a family business, as the Meads are obviously as well. But it's a really nice area to farm. Loads of greenery, loads of varying habitats, and just a nice spot.
So how old would you have been when you milked your first cow?
Oh, I don't know really, to be honest. Old enough, probably just so I could reach to put them on. Reach to put the units on. The parlour would be fitted actually somewhere around when I was born, about 72. So yeah, 2 or 3 years before I was born, and before then it was milking in what we would call a shuppen, like a byre tied up with a net, and then the parlour was fitted in the early 70s there. So it's all I've known. It's all I've ever wanted to do. Some days are great, some days aren't quite so great, but I've had a long time to get used to it.
Oh, that's really fascinating. Well, I look forward to digging into the history a bit more. And so coming on to you, Timothy Mead, where do you fit into the supply chain for milk and dairy?
My father did a classic in terms of farming families. He fell out with his family, so he left home when he was 16 and went to live with his uncle. And then he and my mother bought the farm in 1961 with a mortgage from the NFU. And for the first 10 years, thought that they could make a living out of dairy farming from sort of 30 cows. And then that transpired that was getting harder and harder. They then started diversifying into pick your own strawberries and cream. And then we started making yogurt probably 50 years ago. And I've been involved in the business for 40 years as a yogurt maker. And now with my mother, we farm British Frisian cattle, pedigree, and sell quite a few bulls to AI companies. And I think Lake Mead Prancer and Lake Mead Jingle are quite well known in the Frisian world. We then have gone on and expanded the production side. So we take milk from probably 200 dairy farms across the country, organic for the Yo Valley Organic brand. And we also, support some of the supermarkets with their retailer label products. So we're sort of, 65 years farming in the valley, 50 years as yogurt makers, and 35 years as an organic brand, really. And I'm aspiring to retire and hand over stuff so I can get my hands back on the cows.
So how do you, I guess starting at the consumer end, a lot of our listeners are kind of curious consumers. How do you go about communicating to them the complexities of dairy farming? What are the things that you lean into to help sell your yogurt? You mentioned the word organic. That's obviously one of the things, but I'm curious to kind of learn more about that. What do you find consumers understand, and equally, what do you find they don't understand?
Well, I think in dairy farming, there were like 150,000 dairy farmers when my parents moved to Holt Farm. There's less than 7,000 dairy farmers today, and the whole system of supply and demand is completely shot and is completely unworkable. But that's the sort of the issues with the structure of dairying in this country. It's dominated, it used to be dominated by British PLCs like Unigate and Express Dairies and Northern Foods. And now it is, we've basically sold the UK dairy farming to our continental friends. And therefore we don't have people working on behalf of dairy farmers. That's the sort of the system that we're up against. The consumer bit is really quite simple, is that you've got to create enough emotion with your consumers who are buying your product that makes them want to spend that little bit more money for you, so you can then provide the money to the farmers to farm in the way that you can then take the messages to the consumer. So branding is all about creating emotion with consumers around your products. They don't really want to know about the systemic issues of the industry. They just want to buy into emotions, in the same way as most children will choose an iPhone over a Samsung when you give them a choice. And that's just some inherent emotional love of the product and the messages that they've been given. So our job is to create emotion around our products.
And particularly, obviously 6 inches of soil, we're trying to get that connection back to soil. What do you think consumers understand about that and maybe nature and greenery? Like, what triggers emotions in your consumers?
Unfortunately, I'm going to say all the wrong things from your perspective, probably, is that we've been, I think consumers have been quite fixated about nature and climate for a long time, and therefore lots of brands would have done awful lots of work on, climate offsetting and nature projects, etc., etc. And we've done exactly the same, but in the last 2 or 3 years, in the same way as, soil began to get recognised, probably 10 years ago, the latest recognition really is about ultra-processed food and everything like that. And luckily, dairy is the least ultra-processed food. It is the most natural food, is the most wholesome food. And therefore, for the first time in 30 years that I can remember, we produce foods that people consume. We can now talk about the food because they're interested in the food, as opposed to the soil or the climate or the nature or the whatever. So for us at the moment, we're in this position where the conversation around everything is around the quality and of wholesomeness, and whole milk is back in growth and all those sorts of things, which is brilliant if you're producing food that isn't ultra-processed and has got bacteria in and all that sort of stuff. So there are trends of conversations, and at the moment, the trend is around the ultra-processed food and the gut health, which is brilliant for farmers who produce food that is like dairy, which is really wholesome and nutritious, and fat's no longer bad for you, because it's got all the right things in it. So all the things that we've been told for, red meat's back in trend again, isn't it? Because it's got all the iron and the nutrient density. So it's a brilliant time for farmers who are producing really healthy, natural food.
Yeah, and I guess trying to tell that story and relate it back to, there's a lot of evidence out there that directly connects soil health with nutrient density of whatever is coming from the soil. And I'm sure the same is true of milk. And that's got to be something that consumers care about too. But James, coming back to you, I know that you're kind of changing the way that you're selling your milk. Is that right? So you were kind of selling it into the system, and now you're trying to do a bit of kind of direct consumer work. I was wondering if you could kind of talk us through a little bit about why you're making that change, and just kind of lift the lid on that a little bit for us.
I suppose if you wound back the clock to when my great grandfather probably was milking here cows, very small scale then, but it would be the average size farm. It'd be 15, 20 cows, and that would have been a decent size sort of herd at the time. There was no milk marketing bar. There was nowhere to sell your fresh milk if you were outside of a city or a big town. The way that you sold it was butter. You processed it on farm, and you then sold it at the butter market in Kendal, and that gave you then a direct connection to your consumer, to the actual buyer. So you saw the people that were buying your milk, and they would keep buying your butter, and they would come back all the time. They would buy from the same people all the time, and you had that connection. And then when the milk marketing board was set up, when you then were selling milk in bulk or in milk churns, milk kits as we would call them, in bulk and things, we immediately lost that connection with the consumer. The consumer became someone that we didn't see, that we didn't really care about that much, really. We didn't have to care about them. We became, as an industry, very, I think, quite lazy, really. We didn't have to bother telling our story. We didn't have to bother trying to farm better so the consumer got a better product. Everything was very much us and them. And that's the way it's gone. That's the way it's gone, really, for our business, as all the businesses, all the dairy businesses, really, apart from a very select few. You lost all that connection with the consumer. But as we began to tell our story more and more, and we'd always done stuff for environment and what have you anyway, but as we got to telling our story more and more, and social media really helps us then be able to tell that to a wider community, really. People became interested in what we were doing then. So we've been organic for 20 years here at Strickley, but then prior to, we've got, of course, the dairy shorthorns for over 100 years, which is a bit of a point of difference. But we've also done a lot for environment over all that time as well. So, for instance, my granddad and dad created a pond, and a huge big pond and woodland, and then we'd always manage the hedges on a traditional way. So we've done things sort of quite outside the norm, really, for many generations. People were looking at that and wanting to be able to support us the way we farm. And yes, you could go and buy organic milk, and it would, hopefully it might contain some of our milk if it was from one of our cooperative buyers. But it just got mixed up with everyone else's. Even though it was organic, it was then mixed up with another 5-6 farms on that tanker, and we lost the individuality of the story that we were creating here at Strickley. We lost that on the tanker. And other farmers are doing great stuff, but they weren't. People wanted to support what we were doing. Or we've wanted to try and create a product that people could buy direct from us. And the easiest way, really, because milk's not an easy thing to suddenly change into a product. It isn't meat you can, like a bull or a lamb or a beef or a lamb or whatever, you can put it in the freezer and you can sell it whenever you want. Milk, it goes off the next day. So you really need to, you need to have your market set up and everything. And so liquid milk for us is where we're looking at initially, and then we're going to look at cream and then other products as well on the back of that, and probably some cheese as well. So we've had this connection really with the local community, and we're going to then give them the ability to have some agency really in how they want to see the landscape farmed around their houses and around the roads that they drive up and down to school or to work or wherever. They see our cows grazing by the side of the road. They see the hedges and everything that we're, we might be hedge laying by the side of the road, and we'll stop and we'll talk, and they'll see the cows walking on the road, maybe even actually down the road with them rather than just across the road. And people stop and ask. So it's really the sort of consumer that has asked us to sort of do something, and that's what's led us to doing what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess to Tim's point earlier, like, it's building that emotional connection of turning it from being a commodity to something a little bit more special, that they understand where it comes from because they've actually met you or they've seen you out, working the hedges. I mean, I wonder what your great-great-grandfather would think of things today if he was around. Do you ever think about that?
He would be able to stand at the top of one of our hills and look down, and he'd be able to name every field that he was farming at the time. It's now much bigger. It was about 100 acres. Then it's 300 now that we own. But you can see it. You see it off on the top of the hill. All the fields he would recognise. So we've still got all the small fields, all the boundaries and everything. The ones that he was hedge laying, in the late 1800s, we're still hedge laying those now. The cows are still browsing them. We're still making hay or silage from those fields and everything. The management's changed in and around that. It very much has. But in terms of the sort of landscape, it would be very, very recognisable to him. And I would like to think they would look down quite happy as to how we're managing the farm. You don't know. they might wonder why the hell you still got all these old hedges. You might as well have pulled them out and made them all nice and big. I don't know. But it's you would kind of hope that they would be quite proud of the way we're farming now.
And also just quick delving into the history of dairy. What would the breeds that your great-great-grandfather have had still be the same as what you have now? And Timothy mentioned about Friesians. which are different to your breed. To the consumer that might be listening, what's the relevance of the breed type to, the milk that they're drinking? Why do you pick a certain breed over another?
So we've got Dairy Shorthorn. So the Dairy Shorthorns are the oldest pedigree breed in the world. So the oldest herd book in the world. It goes back 1822 was when the herd book was created, and so our cows have been in that herd book since 1915, I think, pedigree. Prior to that, there would have been non-pedigree Dairy Shorthorns. So the breed has been improved in that time. They're not the same cows, but they're the same families. So we've every breed is improving all the time. It's always, no one's bred the perfect cow yet. You're always trying to breed something slightly better. That's why cloning will never work, because you're putting a point into you're stopping the improvements there and then. So we're always trying to breed a better cow for the system that we run, and that will be everything from fertility and foot health and temperament, milk quality, milk yield. Everything about a cow. You will judge when you are trying to breed a better animal. But different cows have different traits in terms of how they can convert that grass as well into milk, and then the commodities of that milk, and then also the constituents of that milk, and also the flavour and things like that, the cream layer, everything is breed of cow, but also to the farm. Every farm is quite unique.
Yeah, and Tim, most of the farmers that you work with have black and white Friesians, right? Is that because of the milk yield, or maybe that's not fair? Maybe they do work with different.
No, I think there's a complete cross section of cows that farmers will choose the cows that they feel are best for their farms and whatever. So my father used to show British Friesians at the Western Supermare show when he was like 9 or something like that. So when my parents moved to Holt Farm, they brought some of their Friesians with them from the family farm. And I think my mother is probably the most obsessive person around British Friesian breed. She writes that she updates the history every 10 years on the breed for the breed book. And, we've got huge numbers of bulls that we sell. I guess the Friesians for us are their ability to be a dual breed. So we finish all of the beef from the dairy herd. So all of the bull calves go through the finishing system that we have. There's a lot of grass in Somerset, and, we're on the top of the Mendip, so we still get a lot of rain as well. So we farm partly in the valley and partly up on the Mendip Plateau, where we're about 65 inches of rain a year. I don't know how that compares with Cumbria, but 65 inches is a fair dollop around here. And we've just found that the Friesian cow is its ability to go out and graze grass and turn that into milk, whilst delivering you the beef calves as well. So it's a little bit like, so people who breed horses or dogs will have their favourites. Personally, I quite like shorthorns myself, but I think my mother would disown me if we ever introduced shorthorns into the herd. I think they're lovely. I think they're lovely cattle.
Well, I think all cows are beautiful, but that's a story for another day. But so the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Tim, is that, both of you mentioned about cattle eating grass. Listeners to the pod all over, especially across in the US, where a lot of corn is fed. Tim, I was curious because I think you're quite knowledgeable on the history of dairy and this.
Because I'm old.
But can you help kind of educate me and the listeners on cows eating grass versus corn and, dairy in different parts of the world?
So I think when my parents moved to Holt Farm, the cows were giving, so the average herd was probably, in the 1960s, was probably about 3,500 litres, 4,000 litres per animal. I don't know what the maximum you can get from grass is. I think 3,000 litres is if you're getting 3,000 litres from grass, I think you're doing quite well. Or I think you're doing very well.
And that's per cow per year, right?
Per year. And then the world population moved in all these places like California and, the Middle East, and everybody wanted their ice creams and their butter pats. And so people moved cows to areas where there wasn't grass. Naturally, it was either too hot or too dry. And then they developed cows to eat food like grains and things like that were, the cows aren't necessarily suited to eating. And therefore, if you're keeping your cows inside because it's too dry or too cold or whatever, then the industry machine took over and bred cows that produce ridiculous quantities of milk. If you look back to the 1960s when what they naturally did, I think economics meant that around the world people wanted dairy, And instead of just taking the dairy from the bits of the world where grass grew and cows could go outside for the majority of their time, we produced a farming system. So I think the average herd in this country is around 200, it's about 200 now, 200 cows. But 200 cows is still, everybody thinks it's industrialised, but 200 cows is probably a 3 or 4 person farm, which is a sort of family farm. It's not the 100,000 cows in a shed in Wisconsin or California or Saudi Arabia. I think most businesses have got bigger and scale comes into it to some degree. But I think the average herd is now 200 cows in the UK, whereas it used to be 30 cows. Cows produce on average twice as much as they did 50 years ago. And that's through genetics and feeding and nutrition. And, so you're going to get some breeding benefits. And the question is, have some people just taken it ridiculously too far? My answer as a supporter of organic farming would be absolutely yes. Having cows produce 20,000 litres and just live in a barn doesn't seem right. But rather than taking milk from parts of the world to parts of the world like the Middle East, where they want their ice cream and their lattes, they've decided to try and put the cattle there and then take all the grain to them from other parts of the world. And that just...
Yeah, it seems like farming out of context, doesn't it? Which I know is one of the key kind of principles of regenerative agriculture, is trying to farm in respect of where you are, geographically as much as anything else. And that seems really important, especially in dairy.
Yeah, so when we went into organic 35 years ago, it wasn't necessarily because of the purity of the chemicals or the fertilizers or the bits and pieces. It's just that the organic standards sort of protected a farm from getting too big, and therefore it was still part of the community. That so if all farms ended up being 1,000 cows, then that was something that we just didn't feel that was right. So our motivation for going into it was more about limiting scale. And if the cows have got to go outside, you can't walk 10,000 cows to a field because they'll be walking all day. That was what really inspired us to get involved in organic farming, was that there was a limitation on the size and the scale and how much animals could be pushed beyond their natural sort of ability.
Yeah, and I guess, James, like thinking about your farm and the points that Timothy just made, I mean, the comparison set against each other as to the kind of farming that you're doing set against, these gigantic dairy operations in Dubai or Wisconsin. What are some of the things that you're doing to kind of, I guess, help your soil down the pathway of regeneration? I mean, I know you do a lot for nature-friendly farming, so perhaps you would kind of share a little bit more about that and why it's important to you, your farm, your cows, and I guess ultimately the milk that you're producing.
So, yeah, I mean, our herd's grown, so like I said, back, we were 15, 20 cows when we, when great-grandfather was farming here and when he first started registering his shorthorns then 100 odd years ago. And now we're 130 cows, so still, well below the average size for the UK. It's probably about the average size for the herd round here, really, in our area, although there are some bigger herds setting up now. There's sort of 2 or 3 I can think of around Kendal that are 500-600 cows, but they're bringing the grass in, so the cattle are inside full time. So they are fully housed system. Obviously not organic because you can't do that organically. You're on an organic system, they have to graze the majority of the time. Ours are outside from, when are they out? They are out mid-March, maybe even first week of March if we're really lucky, through to first week of November. And that for us is about all we can really, it's just too wet. I mean, we are in Cumbria, it is cold and wet up here, so we sort of stretch it as much as we can. So we're giving the cows the option to go out when the weather is suitable. And then it helps us, helps our business, helps our management. The cows love it, and they'll soon tell you if they don't want to be outside because they'll come back in again. But our cows have been bred to graze. They've been bred to go out.
You're milking twice a day, is that right?
Yeah, twice a day. So we've got to move the cows twice a day. And it's not it often isn't the cows actually in the field that's the problem. It's when you're moving them to and from the parlour. So like, for instance, you could outwinter them. Some people try and outwinter, not round here, but up round here we are just a bit extreme weather for that. But you can outwinter young stock and maybe non-milking animals and stuff. But they're not coming backwards and forwards to the parlour. You can mob graze them around. You can move them around, fresh grazing every day. But you can do that field to field without having to go down tracks and stuff. So you can kind of avoid it that way. So yeah, so we are very much a grass-based system, but topped up with bought in concentrates as well, but try and minimise the concentrates because they are very expensive on an organic system. So the more we can get out of that grass that we can grow, the better. And we say grass, but it isn't just grass. So grass is, it's like a perennial ryegrass is a majority of the grass species in this country. Nothing is natural, so every grass species is bred. It's bred genetically to be high energy, high protein, highly digestible as well. It's got to be hardy. It's got to, there's different species will do better in drought. Different species will do better at the start of the year, the end of the year, and whatever. So we've got some perennial ryegrass. We've then got things like timothy, cocksfoot, fescues, red and white clovers. We've got chicory. We've got plantains. Every mouthful that cow gets from that ground, from the ground in the field, we call it grass, but but there might only be 50% of it's grass, and the rest of it is multi-species. The legumes are there because they're great for protein. They're great for fixing nitrogen into the soil, which then benefits grass growth from all the other species. They're deeper rooted as well. They're also flowering, so you get the benefits for the pollinated stuff on there. Other species like cocksfoot, timothy, they're deeper rooted as well, so they will do better when it's droughty. So if you're struggling for rainfall, those are better at that time, in those periods. Then you've got chicory, plantain, that sort of thing. They've got a really deep taproot. So they're really good for sort of preventing compaction and stuff as well. And because they're deeper rooted, and because you've got multi-species and all different depths of roots, different types of roots, they're bringing up all the different minerals as well and trace elements into that cow. Whenever it grabs that, it is getting a full suite of minerals and trace elements as well. So
as well as allowing the root exudates to put stuff back in the soil as well, right? So because you've got that tremendous biodiversity,
that's it.
Really
Absolutely, yeah. So we want that soil to be as alive. It's the stuff that we see on the top. It looks great in an organic system. You get all this diversity above the ground. Well, that means you got even more diversity below the ground as well that we can't see. And then it's not even just the hedges. It's not even just the fields that are providing food for the cows.
Before we get to the answer, we'll be right back. Take it away, Tilly.
6 inches of soil is made possible by...
Fielden is the English whiskey that's changing farming for the better. Field by field, harvest by harvest. Fielden is bringing England's fields back to life with diverse grains that thrive naturally. No sprays, no artificial fertilisers, no shortcuts. It's no chem, regen. Regenerative farming without chemicals. The result? Healthy soils, clean waters, flourishing biodiversity, a smaller carbon footprint, and whiskey full of flavour. Think warm, flaky pastry, butter and caramel. Fields full of life, whiskey full of flavour. Visit fielden.com, Fielden, and remember to drink responsibly.
Back to you, Daddy.
It's not even just the fields that are providing food for the cows. It's also the hedges as well. So if we have a really diverse mature hedge around the field, the cows can browse on that, and they can get up to 30% of their dry matter intake from the hedges if we give them the opportunity, and then they can self-medicate from that as well. So if we allow them as many different species as we can around their field or on the track home to the pile or whatever it might be, around the yard or whatever, it gives them the opportunity to really eat what they want when they want.
Yeah, it sounds like a really nice regenerative system you've got going on there. Tim, how do you kind of measure regenerative agriculture in your business? You're obviously dealing with a lot of farmers and trying to create that emotional connection, but how do you measure it? How do you determine what is regenerative and what isn't?
There's a very healthy, lively debate within the organic old school organic guys would be quite wary about the regenerative world. It's like, well, we're organic and they're all regenerative, and are they not if they're not organic? I would say that for the first 10 years of being organic dairy farmers, we weren't particularly regenerative, because I think you can be organic according to the standards, but not farm in a particularly regenerative way. And I think it's only in the last 10 or 15 years that we will consider ourselves to be regenerative farmers. For me, there is an absolute, the whole debate around what is regenerative and what are the standards. And some people don't have standards, and some people think there should be standards. Some people don't want there to be standards because it will limit people's adoption of more regenerative practices. What we do in our business is we measure carbon. We measured our carbon in 2015, 2020. We're just redoing it now. And the absolute proof point of our business, of our farmland being regenerative, is that we're building more carbon every 5-10 year period. So for us, being regenerative is regenerating the carbon stocks that have been lost over a period of time. Lots of other people have got lots of other definitions. Lots of people don't know what the definition is. But for us, it's very simple, is that if we can build carbon on 5, 10 year, 15, 20 year programs through locking up more carbon, then we would classify ourselves as regenerative organic.
Yeah. And presumably, I mean, it's popular. Having recently come back from groundswell, I noticed that the Yeo Valley tent was huge and super busy. You were packed out with supermarket buyers. So presumably it's something that is working, that there is demand out there for farmers to farm this way and produce, milk and cheese and butter. Is that fair? Like, have you noticed that change in the last few years, that consumers are starting to care?
I'll probably get myself into a bit of trouble here. I think dairy farming's been under pressure from people who don't want cows to be milked in the last 10 years, and alternative milks and things like that, which seems to be disappearing to some degree. So dairy farmers, I think, have been under pressure from outside influence and whatever probably for 10 years. And therefore, when, a group of farmers are under pressure, they sort of circle the wagons, and we defend dairying as the whole of dairying. Whereas I think there's probably two distinct types of dairy farming. There's the grass-based cows going outside grazing, and then there's the people who keep the cows indoors and feed them lots of maize and soya. I think there are two different systems, but we tend to, there's a recent thing where they've launched a roadmap for British dairying, and it's like they want a roadmap for both sides to be the same. And it's like they're just not accepting that there's a divergence of systems, but we're treated in a way that they're trying to come up with solutions and roadmaps for anybody who produces dairy. And I think the acceptance that there is a diverging system is part of the interest in regenerative. So I know that First Milk, who we source some of the milk for our business from, they've got 800 dairy farmers, and they would basically consider themselves to be the regenerative farming cooperative. So all of their farmers are, I think, putting their cows out and grazing their cows and bits and pieces. So I think the interest that is being shown is not just the 2% that is organic, but there's the potential that half the dairy farmers may well be able to be recognised as farming in a way where their cows go outside and they're grazing them and they're not producing 15,000 litres from a cow. So having been involved for organic for 35 years, we've got to 2% of the market, which is a sort of like, does that make any difference to, there's 2% of land, I guess, being farmed on dairy farms, and that makes a difference, but has it made a sizable difference, a material difference? Not particularly, but all of the system, all the things that James was talking about in terms of herbal lays and practices and things like that, lots of non-organic farmers are adopting herbal lays and all those practices. And that's not bad, because potentially the influence of what's been learned in the organic sector for 20 or 30 years might have a greater benefit if lots of other people adopt it without going the full 9 yards to being organic. And that's
because that way you can talk to the other 98% of the market, and they've got a chance at changing themselves for the better, maybe without going all the way to the current 2% that's organic. That feels like progress, right? And
so there are many, many different views in the organic world about, is it the purest gold standard? But if it influences the rest of, there's always extremes on either side. And if organic is influencing lots of farmers to adopt what we consider to be really good practices, then that's got to be brilliant. There'll be some that want to go down what we would classify as unsustainable intensification, which is where some people will classify themselves as sustainable intensification. Let's just get another 5,000 litres out of every cow, and therefore the carbon footprint of the living animal the carbon footprint might go down a bit, but I don't think, we just don't see that as sustainable. So
yeah, because obviously when the cows are in the shed, basically they're enteric atmospheric methane machines, like they're belching, methane with carbon locked in it out into the atmosphere, and their regenerative capabilities as a ruminant animal out in the pasture doesn't exist. And that seems to be, something that's really important.
I don't know what the statistics are of how much milk comes from cows that don't go out to grass now. I mean, I suspect it's probably almost 50-50. It's probably 30% of the herds are producing 50% of the milk. And that's just, going back to our reason for getting into organic, that was just not a farming system that we particularly wanted to be involved in, make products from or whatever.
Yeah. And just last question on the kind of the consumer end. If you're a consumer and you're in the milk aisle, what are some of the things that you should look out for, and don't just say Yo Valley branding on the side of it, Tim?
So the biggest thing, so it takes 1.2 seconds for somebody to shop the milk aisle. Tesco, I think, have got 25,000 products in their stores. The average Tesco consumer puts only 40 different products in their basket every year. So interrupting people's shopping habits is like really, really hard. So because we make products, I quite often do the shopping, because I can go to a supermarket and I'll get back and it's like, well, yeah, I've got 80% in my shopping, but I always buy the brands that I see because I like to try stuff. But 80% of it will be the same stuff week in, week out. For me, if I see anything that stands out that interrupts the 1.2 seconds that the average person makes in that decision process, I mean, that's really difficult. I mean, with James, you've got way more than 1.2 seconds to engage and to get people to make that. And that's brilliant, because people want to be engaged, but when they're in a supermarket, they're flying around doing this, sort of. But 1.2 seconds to make a decision, and therefore they don't change their decision. So for me, if I see anything different that makes me think, I want to see why. I mean, it's like if you buy beer cans and they got rough, sandpapery sort of labels, it's like, whoa, that's a bit macho, and it just makes you, what's different about that? And so it's about feel and look and shapes. And
so I totally get that from most of the consumers, but the ones that do spend more than the 1.2 seconds, what should they be looking for? So my wife and I, it takes us hours to go shopping because we read every ingredient statement and all the claims, and 6 hours later we've done the quick shop for milk and bread. But what about those consumers? What should they be looking out for in terms of the messaging from you? And I'll ask you, James, as well after Tim. What do you think about that?
So generally, I would shop the first aisle and a half of a supermarket and then walk out, having paid. So if you walk past all the fruit and veg and the dairy and the meat and the bread, then do a runner, and you'll avoid all the stuff that's not, it's way better to consume stuff that looks like food and do something with it than go to the areas where somebody else has done it for you, because that won't be as... So I always talk about it as do the aisle and a half challenge. Just don't buy anything else from the rest of the shop.
Yeah. I love that. Listeners, take that on for sure. And what about you, James? Tell me some of the things that you use to kind of communicate to your consumers and the things that they are interested to talk to you about when they're deciding to buy your milk versus going to the local supermarket and getting that milk.
Yeah. Can I answer a question from before, though, a bit about the certification and regenerative and organic and all that? And yeah, I agree with what Tim has said on that, really, that I don't know what Tim's opinion on it is, but I don't think we should have a certification for regen at all. I think once we do that, I think it limits the growth of the market, but it also limits the individual as well. And as we've seen with organic, really, some people, they get to certification every year. You get all your paperwork out, you get certified, and you've ticked a box for that year, and then that's it. So you get to the level of certification and you don't go any further. There's different types of people do organic, but that's the potential what you can do. You will go to whatever Away with Soil Association, and whatever they say you have to do, then you have to do that as a minimum. And quite often you will only do the minimum, because any more than that might potentially cost you more money or time or whatever. Whereas regenerative, for me, it's an endless growth. So the regenerative movement is such that even the very, very best regenerative farms can do more and more and more each year. So its potential for growth for the whole of the industry, but also for the individual farm, is huge. And I think putting a certification on that, I can understand why people want it certified, because there's a lot of potential greenwashing, that all our farms are, you can say you're working towards regenerative farm. Well, that means absolutely nothing. Everyone's working towards something, aren't they? So, but I think, yes, you're going to get those that are greenwashing, but you're also hopefully dragging everyone else along just to be a bit better. Like McCain, obviously they've got a thing where they're wanting to move, they say they're moving towards regenerative farming and all. I don't know how you grow potatoes regeneratively. If all of their farms did 10% better, that would be huge. We don't need all of the McCain farms to be 100% regenerative. We just need a shift, and I think the dragging the majority of people along, encouraging the majority of farmers, consumers, the whole of the food industry to be a bit better, to be 5% better this year, and maybe next year can be 10% better and stuff, then by the end, we will have made enough difference. Organic is great, but we've been organic for a long time. I really do believe in it. It takes a huge commitment to do that. And then I think too many people potentially do get to that level and then don't try and grow further.
Yeah. Well, to both of your points, regenerative and organic are slightly different. The fact that regenerative is something that a lot of farmers can try, even if they're not organic, just by, planting a herbal ley. Now, one thing which I did want to come on to is I wanted to kind of strip this right back to probably school level biology. But to milk a cow, that mama cow has to be pregnant. They're both nodding, listeners. They have to have the calf, right? And then at some point, the calf has to be separated or weaned from the mama cow so that the cow continues to give milk. We posted something on our Instagram, and there was just a bit of curiosity to kind of learn a bit more about that kind of weaning process, the age that weaning process happens, but more importantly, why. And I was wondering if it was okay to ask that question to you, James. Like, can you tell us a bit about weaning and why that is, and just to help people who care just learn about it a bit more.
So when a cow calves here at Strickley, sometimes they're outside when they're calving. In summertime they are, and then if it's winter time they come in, and 95% of the time calve completely unaided, and you barely even know they've done it. That's one of the beauties of the Dairy short-arm breed, is it's got easy calving. So minimum intervention to start with. We then would ensure that calf has had sufficient colostrum. So colostrum is like liquid gold. So that's the first milk from the cow, and that contains antibodies. It's really high in protein and energy. It's like but it also it helps them develop everything from like gut health and everything throughout the whole life. So they really need sufficient colostrum. A sufficient colostrum should be about 10% of the body weight within the first 4 or 5 hours. Within the first 2 hours, so within the first hour and a half, they should really be getting about 3 litres for normal calf, and then a further sort of 2 or 3 litres a few hours after that. So it's quite a big chunk of milk, and we don't know whether they've drunk that by naturally sucking. So we would always ensure that we strip that cow out and then feed that calf to ensure that they are getting that colostrum. Because if you set them up right to start with, then they will be right for the rest of their lives. We leave that calf on that cow then in that pen or outside or whatever it might be for 24 to 36 hours, sometimes 48, depends on where they are in the farm and what time they calve and stuff for milking. And then we then take that calf off, that animal off the mother then at 36 to 48 hours old. And we then put them in individual pens for the first couple of days, and then they then go into a group for 4 or 5 or whatever calves at once then. Few reasons for taking the calf off at that stage. The cow will be producing too much milk, even after 2 days to feed that one calf. So we've bred cows for the last 2,000, 3,000 years, whatever it is really, to be able to take milk off them. That's why, well, probably more than that, isn't it really? But that's why the human race is as we are. One of the main things is because we were able to drink that milk. So we take the calves off at that age. They then stay in group 5, 6, 8 calves or whatever in a group, and then they're then weaned at 10 weeks old. So that's the weaning for us. The weaning isn't the 2 days. The weaning is when they take them off the milk. So they're on whole milk up to sort of 10 weeks old, and then by then they're naturally weaning anyways, and then they then get onto dry feed, hay and what have you, salads and stuff by then.
How long are they giving milk before they have to have another calf?
In theory, if everything goes right with a cow, it should, if everything works right with the management, it should have a calf every year, as it would in nature, So it's they would calve, they would be on, the calf would be on suckling them, and then they would probably get served by a bull, and then they would then have a calf. The calf would naturally wean, and then it would then have a calf 12 months after its first one. So we serve the cows. So we either use artificial insemination or natural service, depending on what the breeding is of that animal. From anything from like 50, 60 days post calving, hopefully get them back in calf by 100 days. And then they calve 270 days later or whatever, to then be 365 days. Now, you could leave that calf on and still be able to milk that cow. It works in some systems. It works in smaller systems where you call a cow and calf, or calf and foot dairy. But once you get over a certain number of cows, it then becomes difficult to separate that calf off. But don't forget, these calves are only a day or two old. They're 40, 50 kilos, and you've got 600 kilo animals, so you can't obviously mix those up within a system. So you've got to split the calves off. It can be done, but the management of that becomes much more difficult and much more time consuming and much more expensive. And if people want to go out there and find calf and foot dairy, there is some about, but it's a cost thing again. It's like organic costs more because, there's more work involved. Cow and calf dairy costs a lot more on top of that as well because of the work that's involved within that.
And Timothy, you mentioned it before when you said a dual purpose breed. Obviously, you can't milk a boy calf unless you're in the movie Dumb and Dumber. So tell us more about getting meat from your dairy herd and what happens to the boys, Tim.
So basically, in the wild, whether you're a wildebeest or a zebra or a deer or a whatever, everybody was pre-designed to calve in the spring when the grass was at its highest, and therefore the most nutritious food was available for the mother to produce all the milk to produce their offspring. Because we consume milk 365 days a year, some people calve all the year round. Some herds are autumn calving, some are spring calving. But as James said, the general thing is that a 365-day calving interval is what would be mimicking somebody that's an animal that would be out grazing naturally on grass. With our herd, I think last year we had a replacement rate of about 18%, which means that the cows are giving between 5 and 6 lactations. Most dairy cows calve 24 months to 30 months, depending on what heifer rearing system you're involving. So therefore, if you're replacing, say, 20% of your cows every year, you need to breed from your best 40%, if you're not using sex semen, to get the 20% heifers that you want to then bring back into the herd. Therefore, the 60% you can put to beef bull, and then the progeny will then be half Angus or half Hereford, half British Frisian. So whether it's we sell quite a lot of bulls, so we select probably 10 bull calves every year to put into the AI system and sell to farmers as dairy bulls. But the rest of the bull calves go with the beef crosses, and we put them through our agroforestry project, and we rear them all till somewhere between 24 and probably 28 months before they then go to the abattoir, and then they go into the organic beef system, as well as the dairy cows that have done their 4 or 5 lactations. We've always done it. We batch up the British Frisian cull cows, and we'll put them in a paddock for 3 or 4 months and get them to a stage where we can just get that little bit more for them. And dairy beef is arguably tastier, and it's got more nutrients in the density of the fat. And so have you ever seen, the sort of the steaks that you get off, retired Jersey cows? I mean, the density of the colour of the marbling of the fat is where all the flavour and the nutrients is. So, so all of our, whether it's the cows coming to the end of their lactations or the calves that were being born, we finish everything on the farm here.
That's great. That's really important. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. Before we go, I just was curious if, James, starting with you, if you had any closing thoughts that you wanted our listeners to take away in terms of, dairy and regenerative dairy and the future of the industry, anything like that you'd like our listeners to kind of think about as they leave the pod.
I think for me, it's learn where your food comes from. Spend more than the 1.2 seconds in the dairy aisle and in every aisle. Look at the back of the label, look at the claims that there might be. Dig a bit deeper. If you are lucky enough to be able to talk to farmers directly, then talk to them. If you live in an area where there is farmers, But with social media, there is so much opportunity to be able to talk directly to the people that are actually at the coalface doing the actual hard work, producing that food. Talk to the actual farmers, because they're the ones that know what's actually happening within farming. Yeah, if all else fails and you really want to make a difference, organic is the easiest way. As local as you can get. If it's your county, if it's your town, if it's your county, or if it's your country, organic is the easiest way to be able to sort of guarantee that it's been produced well.
How about you, Tim? Closing thoughts?
I don't know who, most of us were at Groundswell. I think redefining the relationship between farmers and consumers is really important. There is 3 times more carbon locked up in soil than there is in the atmosphere where it's causing issues. Farmers can be part of the solution. And therefore, I think building the relationship between farmers and consumers so that they see us as part of the solution, and then their support can be part of the solution as well. And I'm a big supporter of regional and British products. I mean, I think if you look at a lot of other countries in Europe, they've done a lot better because farming is much, much more important to the Irish or the Danes or the Swedes. They've done their governments have taken it a lot more seriously. They've supported farmers a lot more. So, I think we're 1% of GDP is farming or something like that. If it's 10% in your country, then it actually makes a difference to jobs and employment and bits and pieces. So farming has just got to rediscover its relationship with the British public, and for both of us to accept that for farmers to get on and be part of the solution, and for consumers to support us in that journey. Could
I add on to what Tim's just said? That I think for me, farmers for farming has to be a part of the solution. Otherwise, we're not going to go anywhere, are they? And consumers have a unique ability really to help drive that. Really, so yeah, linking all that, whether it is from their food buying choices or from the way that they vote or whatever it might be, and we've all got such opportunity to make a huge difference.
Oh, that's great, well said. And thanks again for your time today. That was excellent. See you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Good stuff.
Cheerio. Nice to meet you, James. Nice to meet you.
You too. You too.
Cheers.
So, Claire, that was the episode. What did you think?
Well, personally, I always love listening to James Robinson speak. I've interviewed and talked to him so long, and he still comes out with new pearls of wisdom or just insight because he's a very thoughtful person. I just love his connection to the land. He has that real connection to the soil under his feet, and so do his family. And there's his son. So few people, got the younger generation coming through. He's got his dad, himself, his son, his wife. Everyone's involved in it, and it's deep connection there.
And 150 years. I mean, think about that. It is mind-blowing and so lovely. And I've never visited his farm, but I can imagine exactly what it's like because I know the Lake District quite well. And obviously his accent is a complete treasure. He's a joy to listen to. But just thinking about how he's keeping those traditional methods going in today's world and finding new ways to connect with markets, with consumers and customers who care about that, I think is really something that I took away from the episode.
Yeah, they've been on a long journey. They've done many different things, by going organic, but now they're selling directly to the customer. That's brave. But that clearly means they're respected in their community, and the way he talks about talking to people when he's hedge laying or whatever, and that just always looking out, which is just very special. So he's built an amazing community. He's built a customer base, and so it should do very, very well. I've tried his cheese before because he produced with a local small cheese maker, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So I'm sure it's going to be great.
Yeah.
So how about Tim? What did you gather from him? Because it's a sort of different scale, different outlook.
Well, I loved the relationship both with the land and the soil, how hands-on he was for somebody in his position and who clearly knows every single supermarket out there and has national distribution as a mega massive brand, yet is still very connected with the day-to-day life on the farm. So that relationship was really interesting. And obviously the matriarch of the family, his mum, clearly plays a big role. And I thought that was really sweet hearing him talk about that. And, the importance that she has over breeding and being very proud of the genetics I thought that was really lovely, those two different relationships.
Yeah, I think it can be quite rare now to be in the presence of someone with generations on a farm. For us all to remember that these people are custodians of the land, they have real respect for where they live and how they operate. And Tim is obviously not, they've got their own farm, but they're working with lots and lots and lots of other farms and other businesses. But still, there's that talk of connection. And when you're there, and I've been with the team, it does seem like a healthy company where people are respected and it's ethical. I loved his insight to history, how we've got to this fact of not just having cows outside as we'd all draw a picture of grazing and pastures, but we've got a lot of housed animals. So just chat us through that. Richard, you understand these things more than me. You know, your thoughts on that housing and what
Well, the context is really important. And I mean, he made a point about, you know, even people in Dubai want ice cream every day of the year. And so what happens is you end up having dairies in parts of the world that really aren't suited to that. I mean, I've seen dairies in parts of the US in very, very dry, arid environments, which aren't very suitable. So it becomes a very artificial, man-made, heavily influenced industrial way of getting milk. And they're pretty horrible is a strong word, but it definitely makes you feel some quite strong feelings when you see these dairies. I've been to, you know, some where they've got thousands of cattle, you know, basically in a gigantic car park, in these little white tents where the calves go when they're weaned from their mums, you know, pretty much at birth. There are some things which certainly not everybody out there would agree with. And that all comes from farming out of context and thinking about where you are in the world and what you should be growing on that land. So it definitely made me think about that. And actually in part 2, which we'll come on to next, we definitely cover more of that when we talk to a dairy farmer from the US. But yeah, I thought it was a really good episode and a really good insight for customers and consumers and farmers wanting to understand better about, you know, what regenerative dairy is and the importance of it. So yeah, any other closing thoughts?
Well, I also want to share that we did, myself and Colin, the director of 6 Inches of Soil, last year we were asked by World Wildlife Fund in Britain to cover dairy. And we did a little trip round and we did include James then. And we got to go back to the farm. And so we will be able to share that alongside this. So please look out for us sharing things on socials and YouTube. If you haven't seen that, you can see it for free on the WWF website in their regenerative farming section. It's basically giving farmers voice thoughts. But seeing dairy last year, even the sort of regenerative side of it, it is quite something to understand. So I hope that all listeners will want to find out more and look at where their milk's from and maybe start to think about what we're eating and drinking.
Yeah, fully agree. Well, thank you very much, Soil Mates, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.